When I'm ready to start the drawing of my figure, I want to get from the top to the bottom as quick as I can. I've been reading this great book called The Notebook, A History of Thinking on Paper. And in it, they talk about how artists don't just look at things and say, oh, now I'm drawing an ear, an eye. They really use a different part of their brain than facial recognition. They use a part of their brain that sees shapes and spaces between things. So that's how I'm going to try to be drawing today. I'm going to be trying to draw things that don't really have names. So don't think about what it is, because your mind can tell you that you can't draw this little figure. But if you just think of it as a series of shapes, then your brain doesn't have much to say about that situation. So I'm going to start at the top, sort of get a shape for the head, a shape for the rib cage, the pelvis. I'm going to bring the legs down together. Because their legs are together, I don't really have to draw them separately. I'm just trying to sort of see them as one shape. So it's kind of, you kind of have a little peanut shape when you have the ribs and the pelvis, is what I think of. And because this is a child, the proportions are going to be different than a grown-up. The head is going to be bigger compared to the rest of the body. So maybe she's going to be about 4 heads tall instead of 6.5 heads tall like a grown-up. So I'm going to use my stick to do some measuring, and I'm going to compare her head to the rest of her body. In figure drawing, the head is usually the standard of measurement. So what I'm going to do is see how many heads tall she is. So her head is 1, and then it's 2 to her elbow, 3 to just the middle of her thigh, 4 to just above her feet. And then on my drawing, so I was looking at her head and then just checking how many heads tall she is. So now on my drawing, I'm going to check, and I say she's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've got her too tall. Either her head is too small or she's too short. So I have to change one of those things. So I was going to firm up the shape of the head a little bit, coming down in the figure again, and it's the legs that need to be shorter. You know, it's probably because I'm more used to drawing grown-ups than kids. So this is the order. I drew it, I checked it, and then I corrected it. And now I'm going to remeasure it again to see if I got it right. So I usually don't erase what I've done first. First I redraw, because I don't want to totally erase what I had there and then just be able, like maybe I would put it back in the exact same spot. So see how much shorter I had to make her. So I'm using that Sennelier Lacarte paper, and it is a little hard to erase on. It's hard to get rid of stuff when you make mistakes. So it might not be the best paper to use if you think you're going to need to make a lot of drawing corrections. So what I'm talking about now is that on figures, if you drop a straight line from the pit of the neck and the front, then you can tell where the weight is distributed. So if I stand on my right foot, then the pit of my neck is just over my right foot. And if I stand on my left foot, then the pit of my neck is over my left foot. And on the back, what you measure from is the 7th cervical vertebrae. And that will drop a plumb line down to show you how the weight is distributed by the figure. So I'm just going to spend a couple more minutes drawing. And then I'm going to put in my shadows. It's always easier if you're set up somewhere that you can see light and shadow, because that helps you create form. Okay, and then I just sort of scribbled some of the stuff in the background that's going to be around her. I didn't want to start with a bunch of detail. You know, in the ideal world, you're not confused when you start your color, but in this case, I might, I didn't care if I was a little confused about the background. So the first thing I did was I put in the light on the figure. I usually exaggerate the contrast between the light and the dark because I find that if you don't exaggerate, you might minimalize. And I can always pull it back later. And now I put in my dark side. And I'm not trying to do any detail or anything that's going to make it more rounded. I'm just putting in the extremely strong pattern of light and dark. So I feel pretty happy about just a little start like that. Feel like she's okay. And then I'm just going to put something everywhere else. And some of the leaves were kind of a purplish red, so I decided just to go ahead and start really purple. When everything is green in your picture, which it kind of is here, then you need to see if you can exaggerate the variation in the color that you see. So when you have so much green, you want to ask yourself, well, what kind of green is it? Is it a purple green, a blue green, a yellow green, an orange green? And if you keep your shadow colors a little cooler and your light colors a little warmer, then you'll start to get that sense of light and shadow. Because even though we're in the greenhouse, the sun is out and it is a warm color, the light coming in. Yeah, and I'm just going to try to start with as few colors as possible instead of like differentiating every single plant out there. So I'm just starting the water all the same and some of the plants all the same, and then I'll come back and I'll start putting in more variations because it's just hard. You already have so many things you're juggling. Um, So I was kind of interested, and maybe I'll go back and do it some other time, but in trying to draw her by just drawing the things behind her and not actually drawing her at all, just drawing the shapes behind her to see if I could do that. But another day when I feel better. So most of my pastels are Rembrandts. That's mostly what I use, but that light color on her, on the statue, and the dark color, those are both some other kind of pastels. Maybe they're Great American. And I think I said it's the Sennelier La Carte paper, which you can see just grabs the color right away. So I order my paper from Dakota Pastels, and one thing I like, the way I started was I got a sample set of all their textured papers, of all their sanded papers. And then when I had that set, I wrote the name on the back of each piece of what it was. And then I wrote I wrote what I liked about working on each piece, and that's how I started to find what paper I really liked. And I hadn't really figured out at all even what it was I liked about paper, one paper compared to another. And turns out what I like is a lot of tooth, but not much texture. I like a smooth surface that's very toothy, so I don't have to like fill in little bumps of the paper or anything, but I want it to snatch the pastel right off the stick, which is what sanded paper does. And new papers come out all the time, so it's kind of nice to keep trying new things, which is what I'm doing here. So somebody asked me how I decide what colors in the background I want. And I said, well, I just do it by not looking at it. I'm trying to focus on the figure, and I'm also just doing whatever kind of crosses my mind. So I'm going to work on this again next week during class.